Now, I don't know whether you're like me and have noticed a change in the air. I do quite a lot of travelling with my job, and as I've been driving around, I have noticed an awful lot of changes in the local trees. Now, not all, but there is starting to become a large majority of trees that are already starting to change. Now, it's only the middle of August, but this year I do think we're going to have an early autumn. I think we've been quite spoilt the last few years where our autumns and our leaves have not really changed until October and even in some cases November. But this year I can tell with the trees where they're starting to just turn. There's a slight different colour alteration in those leaves. I've also noticed there's a lot of trees that have already started to go yellow or brown. Now, I don't know whether there is a tree disease going around. I know some of the conker trees or the chestnut trees do get a lot of diseases and they turn their leaves brown much earlier on if there's any issues. But I've started noticing colour changes in the maple leaves, in some of the beech trees and multiple of others. Now, this has surprised me somewhat since we are still in that middle of August. This year has been a very strange year indeed for weather and our climate here in the UK. Now, whereas some of these trees there is just a slight change, some are definitely more dramatic. I have started to notice a few little issues that we're getting here on our allotment. Now, some of these things I do actually think this is the middle of summer and you can probably tell the skies are very, very grey. We've had a lot less light here this year. And through August, with majority of cooler temperatures and our nighttime temperatures here, where I live at the moment, which is in the Midlands, we have been getting temperatures down to 5 or 6 degrees on the nighttime. That's really quite cool for this time of year. And in fact, we've actually had to start closing up our polytunnels to try and protect them somewhat from the cooler temperatures. Now, it's not frost or anything like that, but those cooler temperatures are a big signal to those plants to start thinking about cutting back, producing their fruit and dying back for the autumn months. Now, one of these issues that I've just noticed this morning is on our giant Pacific squash. Now, we've planted this really as ground cover and a little bit of fun. But as you can see, that is some immense cracking. Now, after doing a little bit of research, because I actually haven't come across this kind of extreme cracking before on our squashes, after doing a little bit of research, a lot of the times it's down to a change in the weather, where we've had maybe cooler temperatures, lack of light, or things that the plant thinks we're going into autumn. So it started to harden off its fruit, so the skin starts getting ready so we can cure it long term. And then we get a flush of heat and light and the plant continuously carries on to grow. That skin is now thickened, so it cannot any longer sustain the growth of that squash plant or pumpkin. And apparently this is what causes this issue. Now, I know it's not too much water or too little because we very rarely actually water this squash plant. It's definitely not overwatered. And the amount of rain that we've had of late has not been an immense amount of water. So I know full well, with all the years of growing squashes and probably giving a hell of a lot more water, that's not the case. So in theory, this squash plant thinks it is coming up to autumn and it's started to ripen that fruit. Now, most of our squashes here on our plot, at least, we don't normally harvest until September, even up to October. I like to keep them on those plants for as long as possible here in the UK, up until I know there's going to be a frost. It's the frost that kills these plants, definitely, and they're not very good for the squashes or the pumpkins to get damaged by any frost later on in the year. Now, these Pacific squashes, we were not going to go for a record-breaking squash plant this year. It was mainly as a little bit of fun. We knew we were going to have plenty of space here on our plot this year because we had cut back certain crops this year. And we also haven't thinned out our squashes, so we didn't just take off all the squashes to grow the one major big one. I think next year I will do that, but this year it really wasn't about growing something absolutely humongous. But to be honest, this beast isn't that bad. Now this is one of our giants, and it's doing all right. It's not massive, but it's a half decent size. Later, once it's cured, this will be harvested, but I'm hoping not for at least another month. Now this plant is quite large, and it does take up quite a lot of space, but that was the whole point of us growing it this year. Now another really early change we've had this year is with our sunflowers. Now I grew all these from seed, and this is one of the giant ones. But you can see it's already faded, and in fact this faded about 3 weeks ago. It had a lovely big head, and it really is beautiful, and I'm actually keeping this in the ground to carry on producing some seed because I really want to grow this one for next year. Now, I was a little bit late planting these sunflowers a little bit because the slugs actually had decimated most of my seedlings. I think I planted 30, 40, maybe even 50 sunflower seeds this year. But all of them have gone through that autumnal change really early this year. Now, I normally have sunflowers to at least the end of August, but this year I barely got into August before they'd all started to lose their flowers. Now, some of these sunflower heads I will leave for the birds, some I will harvest from, but they just need to cure now for those seeds to give them some time to ripen so they're viable for next year. So we have got squashes growing in other places that don't have that issue. Some of our squashes, our urticuri, are doing really well, but again, we don't normally harvest those to September. And maybe they're a little bit more ahead at the moment. Their skins are definitely starting to get harder, which in a way is a little bit worrying because it is very, very early to be harvesting any squashes. But I'm going to keep these on the plant for as long as I possibly can, at least hopefully until the first harvest, or they're taking any damage after they've been cured here on our plants. Now, it's only small changes that I've noticed this year when it comes to thinking autumn is going to be on its way earlier this year. And it's not dramatic changes. Sometimes it's just the tinge in the leaves of the trees. They're starting to change their colour from certain greens to another shade of green, which is normally just before the leaves start changing colour to the more vibrant oranges and yellows and reds. But I'm keen to know, how's your area? Is it still really lush and green, or is there starting to have little changes in the trees? Sometimes we just don't notice it until we start looking around us. But I do think this year has definitely been a challenging year. It's either been the cooler temperatures at the very beginning of the growing season, which set us back a little bit with our warmth-loving crops, or it's been a lack of light, or from one extreme to another, where some days have been extremely hot, and then within a day or two it has dropped right down into cooler temperatures. Now, I do believe it has been quite average temperatures this year, but I think this light that we're seriously lacking this year has been a major issue with growing things here in the UK. But I'm interested to know what your area is like. Do you notice a change, or do you think it's just within the norms where you are here in the UK at the moment? So let me know in the comments, let me know whether it's just me in my own imaginary world that thinks autumn is going to be here earlier this year, or whether other people have started to notice that change. Everything from even the sunlight being very golden here at the moment, when normally I notice that golden sunshine in September more than I do notice it in August. It's been a very weird growing year this year.